Hello and welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. A brief programming note before this week's episode. This interview with Mark McManus from Trap One was recorded at the beginning of 2025. You will hear us discussing recent things or upcoming events that are long in the rearview mirror. And I also made the unenviable mistake, and Mark was kind enough to not correct me, of referring to the war machines as the war games. Not one, not two, but 7 different times over that I kept track of. Please forgive the mistake. This week's episode is about the war machines. For our archives, episode 50 is the war games. Stay tuned for Doctor Who Lit takes on Doctor Who and the War Machines by Ian Stewart Black. So Mark, welcome back to Doctor Who Literature. We have been on hiatus for a while. What have you been up to while I've been down?
Well, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for having me back. I suppose most recently I was at a Doctor Who convention down in Epsom. That was the Happy Who Year convention, and it was really nice to get together with some of the other Trap One hosts. There was 5 of us. I think it was the most has ever been in one place at a time. So there's only the Jasons absent. We did say that if anything befell us, that you and the 2 Jasons would inherit Trap One. So that was a great event. There's an incredible lineup of guests as well. There's 3 doctors there, multiple companions. Friend of Doctor Who literature, Philip Hinchcliffe, was there as well. So it was fantastic panels throughout the day.
I hope somebody went over and told him hello on my behalf.
I didn't get a chance to speak to him, unfortunately, but I'm not sure if anybody else did. But he was on stage with Louise Jameson, and so they had some really good stories from that era to tell together.
Oh wow! I will be missing Gallifrey 1 for the first time in 7 years. This will be the first year since 2018 that I have not been able to go due to life circumstances. So I am definitely feeling out of the convention loop, having missed both Gallifrey 2025 and Elihu in August 2024 when I was over in the UK, having much less success meeting Trap One hosts. I was only able to meet Denise my last time out.
Well, Denise is the hardest one to meet. So she's like the Super Rose from the Doctor Who Battles in Time cards. She's the one that was incredibly rare. That it's difficult to track down.
I will pretend to understand that reference, which I do not. For me, Doctor Who remains firmly rooted in the black and white years, which brings us to the subject of today's recording. Mark, what is the War Games about for you?
Well, for me, it's a nostalgic memory because it was the first Target book that I ever owned. I think I'd read a handful of them from my school library, and this was at junior school. And then, and I don't remember this ever happening before or after this, but a sort of a book catalogue came round the classroom where we could just purchase some books from it. And on there were the novelizations of The War Machines, which I'm holding up, only you can see, and Dragonfire, which are consecutive. I think maybe they're released at the same month or consecutive months, but they're consecutive numbers in the Target library number order. So I ordered those and then, sort of patiently waited sort of 28 days or whatever it was in those sort of pre-internet times. And just the excitement then. That was basically the first Doctor Who merchandise or anything that I ever owned. So it was just that kind of excitement of having something. So I'm pretty sure I read this at least twice at the time. And one of the things that sticks in my mind is the talk about the numbers. This is number 136. I can't remember if Dragonfire is 135 or 137, but just thinking, wow, like there's so many of these books to read. It was kind of really fired up that excitement in me that there was loads to track down. It was probably not long before I went up to senior school and thinking what they might have in their library. And then it was the whole thing of just searching through secondhand bookshops and car boot sales and things like that to try and track down the rest of the collection, which I finally finished my Target book collection when we were together in February last year, speaking about Gallifrey convention, in the dealer's room at Galley 2024. I finally finished off my Target book collection from when that would have been 1989, 1990, I think, when I bought the War Machines.
Wow, that is a 40 or a 34-year odyssey, I should say, because that was Gallifrey 2024. I have vivid memories of those book catalogs that you would get. We got those in the States from a company called Scholastic. And probably, I'm not remembering fully, probably about 3 or 4 times a year, you would get a 4-page full color catalog. And they had all sorts of books and children's magazines for you to order. They never had Doctor Who for sale in these magazines because Doctor Who obviously was not a thing in the
Mm-hmm.
United States, especially in the late 70s when I started getting these. But when those books arrived in pristine conditions, it was always the most exciting time of the year. I didn't, of course, ever have the pleasure of getting Doctor Who books out of school catalogs. I had my bi weekly trip to the bookstore where I would see 2 rows, 2 shelves of Doctor Who books, and I'd have to figure out which 2 or 3 I was going to buy for the week. So I still have dreams about that to this day, which I mentioned on the Trap One Target episode several years ago. So for me, obviously, the War Games is much more prosaic. I would have gotten it towards the end of my collecting habit in the late '80s, shortly after it came out, and I would have read it once and then forgotten about it because I was sort of much less interested in Doctor Who at that point. It was only collecting out of habit. War Games as a TV story for me, I would have seen right away because it was part of the Hartnell package that would have come to the States in late '85. It was the 17th and final serial that would have existed as part of that syndication package. So I would have seen the War Games in early 1986, and my abiding memory of it is that I fell asleep around the middle of part three, and it took a long time for me to recognize the genius of the War Games as a TV story. And that I finally grasped when I watched the episode in 2013 as part of my initial 50th anniversary pilgrimage, which only lasted as far as the Faceless Ones. But I was energized by the War Machines because it was the very first time that I'd watched it entirely in sequence, with nothing else in between. And for me, as a visual evolution of Doctor Who, the War Games is just a titanic story. I don't think the script necessarily is the best, but the way Michael Ferguson directs it, I think it is
Mm-hmm.
one of Doctor Who's shining technical examples of the show reinventing itself and changing its visual look. And shortly after that, you have the 10th Planet and the Power of the Daleks, which also reinvent Doctor Who. So it's part of a very important trilogy of stories, with poor old the smugglers getting in the way as a very traditional, safe story. I think the War Games has a lot to praise it visually, even though now it looks like a black and white soporific mess. If you're not watching it in the proper mindset, when would you have first seen the War Games?
I think it's probably when the VHS was released in the UK, which I can't quite remember when that was. I don't remember it being something that was on UK Gold. I didn't have UK Gold, so my auntie would just occasionally record the Sunday omnibuses of UK Gold Doctor Who, but I don't think I got it from there. I've got a feeling that it was the VHS. So whatever year that was released, which actually do have the Doctor Who Complete History to hand, and the merchandise section of that will actually tell me that. 1997. So yeah, this wouldn't actually only be have been maybe 8 or 9 years after I read the book, which I suppose at the time when I was a kid felt like a long time, but it doesn't really feel all that long now.
I don't have the VHS anymore. My recollection is that this was one of the first VHSs to have material added by the restoration team. I think they were able to reconstruct a few seconds that didn't exist in the syndicated package.
Yeah, from what I understand, I just read the complete history articles on it today. That I think they found the print in Nigeria, and there'd been various censor cuts. And over the years, they found bits and pieces that were censor cuts from different countries. And then because they had the complete audio soundtrack that they used a few shots from elsewhere in the story to fill in those missing bits with the soundtrack. So it's not fully complete, but there's not very much of it missing.
I actually discussed the War Machines episode by episode on somebody else's commentary podcast several years ago. So I have already gone on record on another show as to exactly why I think the direction of the story is so ace. But other than the direction, there are so many things to enjoy about the story. How do you like having Ben and Polly as companions? This was, for a while, the only surviving story to feature them. And now, of course, we have several other orphan episodes that they were in. How do you take to Ben and Polly?
Yeah, I really liked them right from the off. I think again, this is something I was just reading today. There was this sort of move away from the teenage companions that they wanted to give it a slightly older outlook. So where we'd had Susan, Vicky, and Dodo in quick succession, they wanted to have these characters who are more kind of in their mid to late 20s, kind of a bit more with it, a bit more independent. So I think it's a great introduction for them. And as much as it's unfortunately a poor farewell for Dodo, it's a great introduction for Ben and Polly. And something that occurred to me watching it again this time, in the current climate where stories are being colorized, is that this would be a good candidate for colorization because there's loads of location work, and all the scenes in the Inferno nightclub, that would be, I imagine, people wearing bright colors and 60s fashion and that kind of thing. And you could make a much more fast-paced story out of it as well if they did the slight cut downs that they do with these and then colorized it. So yeah, I think it would work very well for that. And yeah, I suppose it is kind of their story as well, isn't it? Especially Polly, because she's front and center. She's working in the post office tower, and then she's possessed by Wotan and all the rest of it. So yeah, they both get a lot to do.
I was watching this story on PBS as a rerun in the early 1990s, and my mother happened to walk by the TV during the Inferno nightclub sequence. Now, my mom would have been in her very early 20s when The War Machines was filmed and takes place. And she would have been to nightclubs very similar to the Inferno, and she immediately remarked on the authenticity of the look, the mod characters and the styles and the costumes. Now, of course, this was authentic because they were performing it live at the time. So it's almost a time capsule. And my mom, almost over 25, almost 30 years later, watching this stray few seconds out of the story, endorsed it as authentic, having been there and having been part of that scene in the U.S. So I like having that time capsule of what the world was like. I mean, now we look at it as an old, outdated black and white story, but at the time it was literally as bleeding edge as Doctor Who had ever been.
It's hard to imagine any of the previous stories showing a nightclub, showing as anything as modern and I suppose a bit adult as a nightclub as well. So that's quite cool. I thought it was an interesting thing in the novelization is that it does seem, you get the impression from the book that Dodo has been away from London for longer than the impression we got from the TV. I thought she'd been picked up from the 60s and this is her being returned to more or less her own time. But in the book, she's quite surprised at the fashions and the hairstyles and all these kind of things that have changed in London from when she left. So whether that's just kind of maybe trying to bring that across in the book, that reminding you that we're in the 60s and this is what the fashions are like, or whether it's trying to give Dodo a bit more of a bit more, flesh out the character a little bit more for her last appearance. I'm not sure.
Dodo is credited, I believe, as being the first actress to wear a miniskirt on British television. So,
oh wow, I didn't know that.
I believe that is a caption that I read on the recent animated reconstruction of Celestial Toymaker. But we never had a specific, since Dodo basically joined the TARDIS crew off screen. She runs into the TARDIS. There may have been exterior footage of her running across the grass to get into the police box, but We didn't meet her in her own time. We met her running into the TARDIS by accident. And then, of course, her departure scene is also off screen. So she is the companion that we know the least bit about. So I appreciate the fact that Ian Stewart Black is taking steps to ground the story in her eyes and use her as an audience identification figure for how much London and youth culture would have changed and however long it had been since she went away. And then, of course, you have Ben and Polly with their meet cute, and Polly basically picks him up, and Ben defends her by slugging another guy who's making inappropriate advances, which I think makes the story as contemporary now as anything else.
Yeah.
Doctor Who often has its sexual politics upside down and backwards, even today, but I think Polly picking up Ben and the bad guy being rightly punched in the face makes this story something to smile about or cheer for.
Yeah, Polly's very modern in that way, isn't she? Yeah, that she approaches Ben. She can see that he's looking a bit glum. So yeah, she goes over to try and cheer him up.
And what is it like for you seeing William Hartnell really for the first time becoming the main character of the show? Because now, when he lands, he effortlessly insinuates himself with the scientific elite. He gets himself an invitation to the Voton launch party. And there's this remarkable shot, which I talked about on the other podcast that I was on years ago. There's a remarkable shot of the doctor standing in the background in the middle of this press conference, and he's looking right at the camera with his silver hair and his old fashioned hat while everybody else is buzzing about him. It's a
Yeah,
remarkable composed shot because he immediately grabs the eye. And of course, he gets the invitation to meet Professor Brett and the very famous episode 3 cliffhanger where he grabs his lapels and stares down the war machine. The camera becomes the war machine right in his face, and he's staring it down proudly and defiantly. I have heard that cited as the moment where the Doctor became the lead of the show. So that's another thing to thank the War Games for.
it's a fantastic moment, that isn't it? And I think it's used in a montage in the new series. I could be wrong. I think it's in the Lodger. There's a moment where the Doctor sort of doesn't he headbutt Craig or something like that, and gives him a little kind of just mental download of who he is, and we see a very quick sort of slideshow or just kind of quick montage rather of things. And I think that scene is the one that you get for the first Doctor. Like you say, he's standing there. The soldiers who are armed are kind of running for cover around him, and he just stands his ground and stares the war machine down. Yeah, that's a great moment. And yeah, because I really like it in the TV story, the fact that he just walks in, kind of, as if he owns the place type thing, just that kind of assumed authority that he walks in and everybody starts listening to him. The Ian Stewart Black maybe sees that as a bit of a hole, because in the book we see him go to more lengths to get access to the post office tower. And the bit I really like is that he forges official documents, and it's very much like the scene in The Curse of Fenric when they first arrive at the army base, and he gets on the typewriter and types up a letter, and the bit where he signs it with both both hands at the same time.
Ha!
He pulls out all these kind of stamps and things out of his pockets, doesn't he, and seals and things like that, and forges these documents in the book to get in, like kind of bona fides. And also, there's the idea that Professor Brett knows Ian Chesterton, and the Doctor surmises that Ian will have become one of the foremost scientific voices of the modern day, because not only was he already a scientist or science teacher, but his exposure to alien civilizations and the TARDIS and everything else would have kind of given him a bit of a boost. So there's also the idea that Brett knows Ian, and Ian has talked about the Doctor loads and about his incredible scientific knowledge and everything. So it's another thing that gets him straight to the kind of the front of the queue for Wotan's reveal.
That was the thing that I remember the most from having read the War Games novelization when it came out in the very late 1980s. This retcon that Ian Chesterton had come back and had become part of the scientific scene. Now, My initial fanboyish, very narrow brain at that time did not appreciate this because in real life, Ian Chesterton was not part of the cutting edge scientific elite. He was a science teacher at a school.
Hmm.
I had three different science teachers in my 4 years of high school. Mr. Miller, no relation, although coincidentally, Mr. Miller had been my father's science teacher in Brooklyn 35 years earlier. And then there was Mr. Silverman and Mr. Gordon. None of those guys, even though they were science teachers, had a lead on the government. And if you were to crash land in the United States 5 years later, those guys would not write you a letter of introduction to the government and the scientific elite. So I didn't take that bit well in the book when I first read it, but now I love the idea that Ian has gained so much from his time with the Doctor that he has become an eminent government scientist. And that is a thread that possibly picks up from the David Whitaker novelization of the Daleks, where Ian is not a school teacher, but rather is a scientist trying to get a government position. And it's also been a promise carried out by the spin off novels of the 1990s and 2000s, because in The Face of the Enemy, the David A. McEntee past Doctor adventure, when the Doctor is off on Peladon and the Brigadier needs a new scientific advisor, it is Ian and Barbara that he turns to.
I suppose the thing that goes against that in the TV show is that in the Power of the Doctor, when they have the companions support group at the end, I think Kate would already know about him, wouldn't she? If he already worked for the government, rather than trying to recruit him at that point. Although she's not specifically trying to recruit him, she's just it's kind of a blanket invitation to all the companions there, isn't it?
Another detail that I like in the book is that the war machines are sort of creating themselves generation by generation, removed from Votan. And the first war machine is named, or calls itself, Volk, which is
Yes.
a pun that I would not have been able to pick up on in the late 80s, but it obviously ties back to Richard Wagner.
Yeah, because that's what Wotan's
Right.
from Wagner, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. I hadn't made that connection.
The most famous piece of music that Wagner is associated with today was featured in Apocalypse Now,
Hmm.
Ride of the Valkyries.
Right. So it's a shortening of Valkyrie.
Yes.
No, I hadn't picked up on that. I think what's interesting is, and I hadn't remembered this from reading it, or I hadn't remembered the difference probably by the time I got around to watching the TV episodes, that Ian Stuart Black's conception of the war machines are quite different to how they eventually appeared. And he's for the book, he stuck to his original idea. So even though you see one of the war machines on the cover of the book, as described in the book, they're completely different. And this is just sort of a growing sense that you get as you go through the book and as the machines are being built. As I think one of the first descriptions, it says, the war machine, remarkable in its resemblance to the human form, with a head that can turn from left to right. And I kind of thought, it doesn't really have a human form or a head. And then it talks about, it looks like a huge, deformed, primitive man.
Hmm.
So when I read the complete history, that was how they were described in the script. There's a line in the script, or the original script says, the machine is now taking shape and is beginning to look sufficiently human to be alarming. And in the original script, he also thought that Wotan would look more human. His description says, from a certain angle, it presents an almost human shape as its panels are arranged like a squat, powerful body with a square, clearly defined head. So he was imagining much more kind of android-like, I guess, robots than what we got. Which I think what we get is a bit more imaginative, really.
As we sit here in early 2025 with the threat of AI revolution taking away jobs from people who need income and assigning them to AI programs that do not need income. I think Ian Stewart Black was onto something. I think fear of automation was very much a fear in the 1960s. The final season Rod Serling Twilight Zone episode, The Brain Center at Whipple's, is about the same thing. Robots taking over for workers as a shorthand for robots taking over the world.
Mm.
But Twilight Zone had a very low budget, so they only had access to the Robbie the Robot prop from Forbidden Planet. Whereas Voton on TV is a little more ambitious. Certainly it's unwieldy, and that model never caught on for the same reasons the Mechanoids never caught on. But Ian Stewart Black's version for the novelization, the actual android, sort of like Fritz Lang's Metropolis, it's a great idea, and they probably could not have realized that on TV in 1966, but two serials later, we get the Cybermen, which are basically the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hadn't thought about how close it was to the 10th planet. But I kind of imagine from the book that they must have human-like eyes, because there's two bits where it says the Doctor had seen its eyes blink when it first came into the daylight, but now it had adjusted and it lurched across the road. So there's several references to them actually walking and limping and stuff as well. So they're not even on wheels, are they? They've got legs. And then it says, perhaps the onlookers read too much into the machine's behaviour, but many said a look of alarm filled its eye sockets and the war machine came to a stop. So it does seem like they, because I don't know how else you would put that level of detail into an eye, unless they were imagining it having quite humanized for it to have a look of panic, or for it to be blinking and adjusting to the light and that kind of thing. So maybe he was imagining more something like the 10th Planet Cybermen.
That does, of course, bring to mind Stephen Moffat with Girl in the Fireplace and Deep Breath, where you have the clockwork robots that have or cannibalize human body parts, so have human eyes.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, especially the one in Deep Breath. That's yeah. And the other big change, I think, is there's no references to the Doctor being called Doctor Who in the book, which I understand is just a misunderstanding, that Ian Stewart Black thought the character was called Doctor Who when he wrote the scripts. But certainly by the 80s, even the credits had changed, hadn't they, at the end of each episode, from Doctor Who to the Doctor. So imagine it's something that the editors wouldn't have wanted in the novelization.
And the new series has also gone back and forth as to whether or not the credits should be Doctor Who or the Doctor.
Yeah.
But the War Machines has one of my favorite credit gags, because you see at conventions a lot of T-shirts in Hartnell font that say "Insect Movement" by Rosalind de Winter. But I think for me, as the cast credits roll, it ends with "and Voton." I think that is a great credit.
Yeah.
So I have opened my list of my Doctor Who 60 for 60, which I unveiled at LI Who in August 2023. There is an episode of Doctor Who literature capturing that recording. And then, of course, there is the Gallifrey 2024 panel that you helped me moderate, the 60 for 60 panel. Does the War Games for you belong on a list of the best 60 Doctor Who stories of the show's, I guess now it's first 62 years?
Yeah, I think so. I've never specifically done the list, but it is a first Doctor story that I really rate and enjoy. So I think it probably would make the list if I was to create one.
Hartnell is well represented on my list. And at the Gallifrey panel in 2024, I think the first three stories given as we went around the table, between myself and John Dorney and Lisa McMullen, the first three stories given were all Hartnell stories, although that ended up not being a portent of things to come. So for me, the earliest Hartnell story on my top, or I guess the lowest Hartnell story on my top 60 is The 10th Planet, which I have in at number 55. And then the first Hartnell story on my list would be Unearthly Child at number 9. For me, The War Machines is on my bubbling under list. When I originally did the first draft of my list and got 99 stories, The War Machines is one of them. I think because of the direction and the way that it visually reinvents the series. Doctor Who is always at its best when it's being reimagined by young radicals in their 20s, whereas right now it's being run by old men in their late 50s and early 60s. Michael Ferguson's direction is a game changer for Doctor Who. That's not enough to get it on my actual top 60,
Mm.
again, because I think the direction is a little bit better than the script, but it definitely belongs in the conversation, even if it doesn't belong on the top 60 list, because 60 years is a lot of stories to think about. War Machines doesn't make the cut, but it was one of the last cuts.
I suppose it was interesting that the book came out with Dragonfire as well, because they're both introducing new companions that usher in quite a change in style for the series, and a bit of a new era, aren't they? And like you say, Andrew Cartmel coming in his 20s as well, and kind of taking it into a new direction. So there's I'm sure that wasn't deliberate when they when they scheduled the books, but they probably were quite good ones to kind of capture my young imagination at 8 or 9 years old by reading these.
And it even has the unexpected bonus of the historical rhyme in that here we are, over 35 years since the book came out. Both Annika Wills and Sophie Aldred are still a very active part of Doctor
Mm-hmm.
Who. They are still taking part in different media, be it Big Finish or audiobooks. In fact, there's an empty chair in the gathering of the old companions scene at the end of Power of the Doctor. That empty chair was supposed to have been filled by Annika Wills, who I believe because of the COVID pandemic was not able to make it to recording, but she would have been there. So we
Yeah, that's
almost
a
would have
shame,
had
isn't it?
Annika on screen at the same time as William Russell and
That'd have been
Sophie Aldred.
lovely. Yeah, and the convention I was talking about at the start that I was at on Sunday, she was there as well. She was on stage with Carol Ann Ford and Peter Purvis.
I got to spend a lot of time face to face with Annika Wills. She came to a 1 day convention in Toronto in early 1997, and I was there helping out the convention organizers. So it was her and John Levine, who at that point was going by the name John Anthony Blake, or more likely John Anthony Flake. But Annika Wills was a delight to spend time with for a few hours in 1997. And I'm very glad that she is still very much an ongoing part of the Doctor Who family today here in the 2020s.
Yeah. I've seen her once before, I think, but yeah, she was on great form at the weekend, and yeah, it was really good to see her.
Any closing thoughts about the War Games, either the surviving TV serial or the novelization?
Yeah, two things. One again seems to be a holdover from the original script, and it's included in the book, but then doesn't really go anywhere. And this is the idea that when Wotan possesses people, that their hands become see-through, like an X-ray, so you can see their bones, so that they wear gloves to disguise the fact that they've been taken over and possessed. But it never goes anywhere in the book. It's never used as a way of identifying people who are under the influence. And yeah, it's after it first happens to the first couple of people, it's just never referred to again, or that I noticed again in the book, or whether that whether the effect is reversed when the possession, when Wotan's possession wears off or is disrupted. Yeah, and I suppose just the whole thing of the idea of a computer possessing you is it's a weird mixture, isn't it, between science fiction and the supernatural. It's quite a sort of odd idea. And then the other bit that I really like is just a little scene, a beginning of a little scene with the Doctor. It was a rare occasion for the Doctor to have breakfast at all, much less a full English breakfast. It took his digestive system a day or two to adjust to the differences between planets and centuries. And I really like that idea that the Doctor arrives somewhere, and then, after a couple of days, his digestive system has worked out where he is and what the local food is, and he's ready for it.
Uh, and of course, English cuisine being notoriously poor, he missed a chance to make a joke about that. The, you raise an interesting point about possession of humans by computers because, again, two serials after this, albeit in a different production block, you have Kid Pedler and Innes Lloyd and Jerry Davis all teaming up to give us the 10th planet, which, again, is basically the same thing. The
Mm.
computer absorbs the humans become mechanized. So that's another sense where War Machines and 10th Planet are much closer to one another than has been acknowledged before.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that, but they're only 2 stories apart, aren't they? And I suppose it speaks of the the ideas that the new production team were having, and the direction that the series was going in generally at that point.
So, Mark, where else can we find you? And given that The War Machines is the first Doctor Who story to reference the internet and to predict the
Yes.
formation of the worldwide computer network, where can we find you on the Wotan Wide Web? Or I should say the Wotan Wide Web.
So I'm on Blue Sky as at Quark McManus, and you can hear me on the Trap One podcast and the Maximum Power podcast, which is currently making its way through the final series of Blake 7, Series D. So I'm on a handful of episodes of that podcast as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. After the break, Jason reads his way through War Machines, the novelization by Ian Stewart Black.
There is one special human brain that Wotan needs. The task of leading this brain here to serve Wotan will be an extremely delicate matter. It has been arranged.
Someone is coming.
The 4th member, called here to receive orders. The Doctor's secretary.
What are my instructions?
Doctor Who, The War Machines by Ian Stewart Black. Televised as The War Machines. Teleplay by Ian Stewart Black. From a story by Kit Pedler. Screen credit to Ian Stewart Black. Televised in June and July 1966. Paperback release date February 16, 1989. Target book number 136. Cover artist AlisterPearson, but Concentric Circles by Graeme Wey. London, 1966. When the TARDIS materializes outside the post office tower, the Doctor becomes aware of a powerful and evil force nearby, so he and the ever-curious Dodo set off to investigate. Inside the tower, they track down the source of power to Professor Brett and Wotan, his revolutionary new computer. Designed as a universal problem solver, Wotan has suddenly begun to think for itself and has formulated a deadly plan. Using its phenomenal power, it will program humans to build mobile fighting computers. And with these indestructible war machines, Wotan will take over the world. We have reached the end of Ian Stewart Black's involvement with the Target novelizations, and I'll be calling him ISB from here on out. For those of you new to the show, we previously covered his adaptation of The Savages back in episode 108 with Nathan from Pixel Who, and the Macra Terror with our EP, David Barsky, back in episode 122. Of ISB's novelizations, this one arguably expands the most from the TV story, although unlike Macra Terror, it doesn't change the ending. The opening paragraph strains to be a dramatic image of space flight, but is perhaps a bit unsound from a syntax standpoint. Of course he, the Doctor, knew that in one sense time was a fiction, an attempt by man to measure duration with reference to the sun and stars. But he also knew that although such measurements were based on an impressive formula, all man's concepts were fraught with error. Time was not as it was supposed to be. For here they were, he and his single crew member, Dodo, traveling fortuitously across space, splitting time into fragments, or more exactly, ignoring the passage of time, the rising and setting of the sun, the ebb and flow of tides, the coming and going of the galaxy in which they voyaged. so I won't be bothering you with too much more prose from the book. ISB was born in March 1915. He would have been 51 when The War Machines aired on television, and assuming this book was written in 1988, at this point he is a 73-year-old man looking back on the swinging 60s. Jim Sangster and I both believe that he would be the oldest man to have written one of the original Target novelizations. The TV serial spends a lot of time establishing 1966 as a character in the story, and also establishing how important the Doctor is to Wotan's plans, at least in episodes 1 and 2, with both concepts abruptly forgotten in episodes 3 and 4. The TV story that famously dropped Dodo Chaplet as a character in the middle of episode 2, with no proper departure scene in episode 4, here ISB seeds her departure in chapter 1 as the Doctor senses that, since they've arrived close to her own time, she's going to be leaving soon. You can sense a touch of ISB's disapproval of all the young people with their long hair, in between the mod look and just on the cusp of the summer of love. Interesting too, as Mark mentioned during the interview, is the use of Ian Chesterton as the Doctor's reference to access Professor Brett's operation. Ian as a companion having departed the show before ISB came on as a writer. From a nitpick standpoint, it makes little sense for Ian, as I said earlier, but as a continuity reference and to put a nice flourish under William Russell's tenure on the show, it is a stroke of genius. Professor Brett in Chapter 2 is described as plump, which may have been the internal picture as ISB wrote the script 2 decades earlier, is not a great match for John Harvey's physique. For a story that predicted the modern internet, which by 1989 was on the verge of becoming the quote-unquote information superhighway, ISB is able to write with a sense of satisfaction that his prediction about Wotan's capabilities have been borne out by the passage of time. Polly on page 21 has long and shapely legs. Come on, Ian. Annika Wills, at the time of production, was young enough to be your granddaughter now. Sheesh. ISB muses on the concept of machine intelligence. Page 28. Quote, "The Doctor was surprised to find himself thinking in these terms, for after all, the computer does not have a heart! Exclamation point. It is not a sentient being. It has no ethics, no morality, no conscience. It is only the sum total of its parts plus the knowledge which has been fed into it. It cannot be wiser or cleverer than the brains that created it. Or could it?" That was the question the Doctor now asked himself, and he hoped at this juncture to get some idea of the answer. The book comes out 5 years after The Terminator, and one sees a lot of Skynet in Wotan. ISB has Brett refer to himself in an internal monologue on page 33 as the Master, capital M, which also reflects changes in Doctor Who's mythology since 1966. The episode 1 cliffhanger, so iconic even with its startling use of Doctor Who instead of the Doctor, does honestly lose something on the printed page, as ISB refers back to saying the Doctor instead of Doctor Who. Chapter 4 adds some texture to Wotan's obsession with the Doctor, as we learn that it's the Doctor's presence on Earth that inspires Wotan to move up its world domination plan. This could have been part of the original concept, I don't know, but it does explain how Wotan understands what TARDIS stands for. The episode 2 material goes deeper into Professor Brett's thought processes as he's enthralled to Wotan, and this material in 25 is uncomfortably reminiscent of the coming AI revolution, the one that big tech promises us is inevitable, and which positively zero consumers want anything to do with. The little moment in episode 2, which the discontinuity guide claimed was an off-scripted Hartnell desperately flailing for his next line, appears verbatim in the novelization, which indicates to me that it was scripted in the first place, and thus, in fact, not a desperate ad-lib.
Yes, I wonder, Sir Charles, do you suppose, no, I don't suppose it would.
In terms of script fixes, ISB doesn't exactly go out of his way to add a proper departure scene for Dodo. In her final TV moment recorded on page 67, the Doctor at least adds a brief eulogy not heard on TV. Quote, "She has been a very brave and loyal friend." This is blunted somewhat 4 pages later, when the Doctor tells Ben, which he didn't do on TV, quote, "I am no longer worried about her." Not to put too fine a point on it, yeah, that's the problem. ISB spends time not exactly reimagining the TV story, but certainly expanding its scope. Chapter 7 makes clear that Wotan has also taken over TV Center, certainly a meta-reference to Doctor Who's production. And on page 69, Professor Brett observes that man made Votan in its own image, such that the first generation of war machines was made in Votan's image, but that future generations will resemble man less and less. Later on page 103, the Doctor warns that the war machines can learn from and adapt to future attacks and communicate their knowledge to each other. This means that a grenade that blew up one war machine will no longer blow up others, and it's the sort of lateral thinking that, while this is far from the best Target novelization, most other Target books don't exactly do. On TV, Ben describes the warehouse as employing 20 slave workers. In the book, page 89, ISB ups that number to an even 100. That would have blown the entire Season 3 budget right there, hiring 80 more extras. The Episode 2 cliffhanger, Ben being pursued by the first war machine, does not appear in the book. The cliffhanger moment falls on page 75, but it is some rando being chased, not Ben. The Episode 3 cliffhanger is also stronger on TV than in print. On page 100, end of chapter 9, the Hartnell Doctor bravely faces down the war machine using a radio transmitter and a paint tin, shades of John Pertwee's later mechanical contraption shenanigans. As staged on TV by the great Michael Ferguson, the Hartnell Doctor stares down the war machine by force of will. As I mentioned during the interview with Mark, where I without attribution quoted from Graham Burke on Reckhart's Doctor Who in the 1990s, this is the moment that the Hartnell Doctor becomes the Doctor, the towering hero at the center of the show. In Chapter 10, Professor Brett names one of the war machines Valk. Sure, I'm short for Valkyrie, or Votan's daughter, as per Wagner. I'm not sure if ISB had thought that far ahead, but that makes the war machines female. Now, I had this Mandela effect memory of a very poignant eulogy for Professor Crimpton when he's killed trying to defend Votan against the rogue war machine Valk on page 136, about how the only character on screen to try and fight back mentally against Votan and to resist domination in Episode 1 becomes the most rabid of Votan's human soldiers, and dies in a bitterly ironic way in Episode 4, but I was wrong. That doesn't appear in the novelization at all, although I wish it had. The 3-page final chapter doesn't add much more to the Dodo non-exit, but there's a slight change to the staging of Ben and Polly barging into the TARDIS. On TV, the Doctor had dropped the TARDIS key earlier, retrieved by Ben, which Polly uses to get inside the TARDIS. In the book, Polly barges in, the door having been left open. Also on page 138, they would have little memory of what had happened these last few days, but enough of the mystery would be solved for mankind to understand that it had escaped a dire future under the rule of efficient but totally heartless and purely logical machines. The Doctor wondered whether mankind would take that lesson to heart. Well, that was not his business. He had done what he could in the situation. He couldn't force the inhabitants of any planet to act for their own ultimate good. Ian Stewart Black died in 1997, 82 years old. He never lived to see the 21st century. He never lived to see an age in which Disney licensed its most famous characters, excluding Doctor Who, to OpenAI, to bypass working content creators in favor of AI-generated content, or slop if you will. But he was certainly right. We have not been listening to the Doctor's warnings about Votan.
It's not possible. No, I don't believe it. I won't work for you. I'm human. There's nothing more important than human life. Machines cannot govern man. I will not. What do you want?
What do we talk about when we don't talk about Doctor Who? For much of 2025, I have not been talking about Doctor Who, but the days are still 24 hours long. I still have a clock to punch, and a kid to raise, and things I need to read on the subway, and streaming services whose monthly costs I need to justify by using them. But by costs, I do not include Tubi, which is free ad-supported television. Just download the app on your smart TV or mobile device of choice, or navigate to the website on your laptop, and watch any number of the entire runs of old-time TV series. Tubi is one of many streamers, for example, which carries the original 1959 to 1964 run of Rod Serling's original Twilight Zone, one of the greatest American TV shows ever, and what I've mentioned several times on DW Lit, including in this very episode with Mark earlier. But what I've been watching lately is One Step Beyond, a different American supernatural anthology series, also beginning in 1959, 7 months before The Zone. Whereas Twilight Zone crossed into every genre, westerns, rocket ship sci-fi, historicals, sports, allegories, even a couple of non-supernatural stories with no twist, One Step Beyond, originally called Alcoa Presents, brought to you by the life-saving benefits of good old-fashioned American aluminum foil, lives firmly in the realm of the psychic. Each episode is about ESP, or ghosts. The show is hosted by John Newland, not the showrunner or writer, but the director of every one of its 97 episodes. As a host, John Newland is not quite Rod Serling. He doesn't tell you the names of the actors or writers on next week's episodes. His opening and closing narrations are far more prosaic than Serling's. Plus, each episode being about the same 5 or 6 psychic phenomena over and over again can be a bit samey and draining. The show's conceit is that every episode is based on a true story, or as Newland said in some of his intros, the human record, though most of the shows were in fact fictional and based on urban legends. In a couple of the episodes, Newland serves as detective, interviewing some peripheral characters at the beginning and end of the episode. In one third season story, not included in the Tubi package but easily found on YouTube, it is called The Sacred Mushroom, and I swear I am not making this up. The show is not even a scripted drama at all. It's just Newland himself traveling to Mexico and then ingesting psychedelic fungi on camera to show how it affects him, or doesn't. But what you didn't know about One Step Beyond, or at least I didn't until my recent binge watch, is that even though Alcoa sponsored the show and MGM Studios hosted it, the final 13 episodes of Season 3, the last season, the show pulls up stakes and moves to the UK, with co-production by ITV. These final 13 were shot at MGM Studios outside of London, and many future Doctor Who guest stars appeared on One Step Beyond. Andre Morell, Peter Wingard, Roger Bleeping Delgado, if you need him. From the James Bond verse, Lois Maxwell and Christopher Bleeping Lee. And one episode, The Tiger, again this is not part of the Tubi package but it is available on YouTube, co-stars Zastor from Meglos, and is written by one Ian Stewart Black. That's right, the guy who wrote 3 Doctor Who serials and 3 Doctor Who novelizations wrote one episode of American television, which is not mentioned in his Wikipedia bio. So I watched The Tiger last night. Out of sequence, I'm only in the middle of Season 2, in the middle of a 2-part episode based on the alleged real life of Peter Herkos, a fraudster psychic entertainer who doubled as the inspiration for Stephen King's The Dead Zone, and who was portrayed on camera not by the great Christopher Walken, but rather by future murder-suicide killer Albert Salmi. I bet Peter Herkos did not see that coming. But The Tiger, Season 3, dovetailed so beautifully into the timing of this episode that I decided to dip into the future, like Peter Herkos, allegedly. I'd like to say there's a lot in The Tiger which prefigures Ian Stewart Black's 3 Doctor Whos. Superficially, there is not. No scientific elites draining their fellow man's life force back into the Stone Age, no robots stealing our personal liberties, no giant crabs running slave labor camps with all the song and dance energy of a bar mitzvah reception, but all 3 of ISB's Doctor Who episodes do involve mental slavery. The Tiger is about a Victorian aristocrat's daughter, brutalized by a sadistic governess played by Pamela Brown. The daughter has learned psychic powers from a former nanny, and manifests a terrible revenge upon the governess. The story is not exactly a twist ending, as it's telegraphed numerous times, including a flash-forward beginning, but if you listen to the name of the episode's title, somewhere in there is a clue. So Ian Stewart Black wasn't using Votan or giant crabs for his American TV script, but he really did enjoy the notion of mental domination. And the story's closing lines do have echoes of the death of Professor Kettering in the eventual episode 1 of The Mind of Evil. So this is a decent half hour of TV from 1961, and now I'll resume my watch through back in order, pleased in the knowledge that I'm only about 3 weeks away from reaching Roger Leaping Delgado. With that being said, we will see you in 3 weeks, with a week off for the holidays, as we chill out, but not Netflix and chill out, with Dragonfire. Thank you for joining me on Doctor Who Literature. The executive producer is David Barsky. Each episode is produced by Jim Sangster and yours truly. This week's episode was written and edited by me. Our logo was designed, our YouTube channel, our opening and closing song, all by Jim Sangster. Special thanks to my special guest, Mark McManus. This podcast can be found on your podcast app of choice with all past episodes at creators.spotify.com/pod/show/Doctor Who Lit. It really helps if you rate 5 stars and subscribe. You can find me on Blue Sky and YouTube at Doctor Who Novels, that's Dr. Who Novels, and on email at Doctor Who Literature, that's drwholiterature@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and whatever you do, keep turning the pages.
Last night I dreamt